What's up, witches? Welcome to another episode of the BetterWitch podcast presented by the Modern Witch Network. I'm your host, Allie, aka BronxWitch. I'm a tarot reader, Reiki healer, and owner of BronxWitch HeadQuarters, a conjure shop and witchy workshare space in the Bronx, New York. And I'm going to be coming to you every week with a new topic and perhaps a new guest co-host to share our real life experiences and some of the things we've learned along the way as practicing witches. Because when we know better, we witch better. Today's guest co-host is Keon Dillon, creator of Millennial Soul Food, a web platform for spiritual healing. Keon is an initiate of Ifa, spiritual life and business coach, tarot reader, cultural sociologist, and digital strategist based in New Orleans, Louisiana. They grew up in rural Mississippi, where they cultivated most of their knowledge and experience related to their spiritual practices. Keon is currently teaching one-on-one hoodoo, tarot, and occult/metaphysical studies classes, as well as offering tarot readings and social media growth consultations for small businesses and spiritual entrepreneurs. You can find Keon on Instagram, Patreon, and YouTube as Millennial Soul Food, and on TikTok as Keonce777. Since people already have an idea of who you are and your background and all of that stuff, they're going to be coming into the conversation knowing that you are an initiate of Ifa. And that's where you've received your initiation. But what they probably don't know or may not know is what Ifa is. My background is Wicca, and so Ifa is a practice that I'm only sort of, what's the word, kind of just the foundations or the basics in terms of being familiar with it. And I'm imagining others out there are the same. So maybe you could just start off with telling us a little bit about what that tradition is, and then we can kind of talk about how someone might pursue initiation.
Yeah. So, Ifa Isheshe is specifically what I practice, and it originated in West Africa, in Nigeria specifically, and it's actually like a root spiritual tradition for a lot of other diasporic traditions, like even Vodou, Lukumi, Santeria, Candomblé. A lot of those are like diasporic, like manifestations, of Ifa because of the transatlantic slave trade and stuff like that. But specifically, Ifa is there's a lot that's involved in it, but a lot of people know about it through Orishas. So Orishas are so a lot of them are actually people who lived on the planet. Some of them are more like creative forces of energy.
I didn't know that. I only know the Orishas as like forces of nature. I didn't know that, I guess, kind of like saints in some way, you can kind of be appointed to Orisha hood. I didn't know
Yeah,
that. That's cool.
exactly. Yeah, if you pass the Iwa Pele test, it's good character. So actually, I'm a child of Shango, and Shango, in one of his forms, was a king of the state called Oyo in Nigeria, and so he he's like a he's like one of the Orishas that was like human. So a lot of people do think about Orishas whenever they think about Ifa, but actually there's like a lot more that is encompassed in it. So a lot of it has to do with like I would say the concept of like a village. So being an Ifa is about like your temple, and then a lot of it is like about the character. So the character is called Iwa Pele, and there's just different tenets. I mean, they're pretty basic, like don't steal, da 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 da. But one of the best things, or one of the things that drew me to Ifa, besides like being like reincarnated into this life to do it, which is
Mm-hmm.
way deeper. But there's these different things called odus, and you can think of odus as different energies that we experience. Some of the odus were actually like beings that lived on the planet, and the odus are based on stories that they lived. But principally, odus are these like patakis, or they're these stories that you get during a reading that tell about. They tell the story of like different orishas, and then those stories relate directly to your like life predicament or whatever you're going through at the time. So it's so interesting how it works. But in those odus, there are prescriptions for like different medicines to take, and then also there's like prescriptions for different offerings. So yeah, that's basically what it is
Mm-hmm.
in a nutshell.
And it's a very, at least my perception of it is, it's a fairly structured practice. There are levels. It is an initiatory practice. There are levels of initiation. There are houses, and then within each of those, there are rules and guidelines, both spiritually, I guess, and also in your practice. So there are rules on how you carry out your practice, but also guidelines on, like you said, character, how to live your life, how to be of service, how to heal, and basically like contribute to the world. And that's all so very beautiful and so very interesting. And like you said, you see a lot of these things repeated in other practices that hail from different parts of the world. Knowing that it is an initiatory process, if I am, like, let's just get into it, right? I
Yeah.
want to be initiated in Ifa, okay? Where am I starting that journey? Am I getting a reading first? Am I talking to my spirits guides? Am I starting with me? Am I starting with an elder? If I just heard the word Ifa today and I heard your description and I said, wow, that sounds like something I need to know more about, what do I do on day one?
Hmm. Well, I guess I should explain the different levels. So there's a lot of different
Yeah.
levels, because there are people who are like Orisha devotees, and they never go through any kind of initiation or anything like that.
Okay.
And then there's also initiations to Orishas, and then there's like initiation to Ifa. Ifa isn't necessarily like an Orisha. Ifa is like was the witness to creation as Olodumare created reality. He was kind of like there, like writing everything down.
Cool.
So, me specifically, I wanted to get initiated because getting initiated to Ifa helps you learn about your destiny. So, like your spiritual destiny, and a lot about different gifts. And it just kind of happened to be that, like, my Odu, for like, you get your lifetime Odu whenever you get initiated to Ifa, which is basically like what you're here to do, all this kind of stuff. And mine was like
Mm-hmm.
super witchy, like full of like, I have a lot of Oshun in my Odu, but she's the one who, she speaks to me in the way that like she transformed into the vulture and like flew up to heaven, and represents death and all that kind of stuff. I have like a lot of Iyami energy in my Odu also, so it's really helped me kind of like fill in the cracks as far as like understanding my spiritual gifts,
Mm-hmm.
and also in the context of like a village and stuff like that. So there is although there is a process. Like some houses do it differently, but this is just my advice, just because I feel like I think I've had a pretty good experience. I
Yeah.
love my godparents and stuff like that. They're great. Um, I'm a little bit less, more, I guess, independent, sort of like, my godmom knows my life and stuff like that, but I'm not calling her like every day. But that just happens to be kind of like the person I am and stuff. And they also encourage me to, use my other gifts and stuff like that. And they knew I run a business and all that. But the first thing definitely that people need to go by is a reading and figure out what the Odu says. Because sometimes I know a lot of people they'll just go see somebody, and this isn't anything against like that person or their practice or anything like that, because we're not supposed to gossip about other people's practices. But for me, if
Right.
someone were like, if someone didn't even give me a reading and they were like, "Get initiated," it's like I don't know if you need to be initiated, because sometimes Ifa will be like, you need to pray to Jesus, or you should
Mm.
continue to do Vodou or something like that, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not a witnessing tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not allowed to witness to people and be like, oh, the glory of Ifa.
Right. Yeah, it's a non-proselytizing type of
Exactly.
practice. It's like if you're called to this, then you're called to this, but we're not trying to drag you into that. So that's
Mhm.
probably maybe a red flag that someone could be aware of, is that if you are learning about and I would say that is probably the truth for any practice that I know of that is initiatory in any way, even if it's like casually so. The idea is that those who do the initiation do not go seeking initiates.
Yes.
Typically, I'm sure there are some exceptions to that, but pretty much every tradition that I'm familiar with, those who are of the ranking where they can actually initiate others are people that half the time you can't even find,
Mhm.
let alone
Exactly.
have them like pop up. Like, so no one's in your DMs, guys, being like,
No.
initiate into this practice. Like, if that happens, that's a
We,
big no. We should be seeking. So we start with a reading. So
mhm.
that sounds pretty familiar to me with other practices. I think most traditions would say some type of divination or some type of spiritual exploration is required first to determine whether or not initiation is even for you.
Exactly.
Because, like you mentioned, and I think that's really helpful for people who might be interested in Ifa specifically, that initiation into Ifa is not necessarily necessary. You may have a path that brings you really closely to an Orisha, and it may be your purpose or a part of your walk to devote your life and your service and your practice to them, and them only, and not necessarily into the full Ifa system. And that's
Yeah.
something that I guess only someone who's reading you can tell you. Would
Mhm.
you say, and this is specific to Ifa for sure, would you say it's possible to skip that step in the sense of, I look at your eyes, you're like,
Oh, like
skipping steps?
the shit out of me.
Which? What do you mean?
Yeah, which, keep going. Oh, keep going.
No, okay, so let me clarify by skipping steps. What I mean by that is, can that reading come from someone not a part of Ifa? Can I pull some tarot, by the way, for by like as an example for myself, and be like, okay, it's time to initiate?
Oh, no. No.
No.
No.
So that's a definite no. You're so very clever. I had to ask that just to see if it would like make you sweat under your collar, because I
Oh, you
I
damn.
I always see the ATR practitioners, and like just to mess with them, I'll be like, yeah. So someone gave me a tarot reading and told me my head Orisha, and they're like, and I'm like, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just playing with you. I'm just
Yeah,
playing.
let me break it down. Hey, let me break it down.
I'm
Okay,
just
so
playing.
I do want to say also, the people who don't get initiated, like like if you wanted to work with Oshun, you could go to a river and give offerings. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
definitely want to say that it is a nature worship, kind of
Mhm.
tradition, nature veneration. But once you get initiated, that's into learning more about like the mystery schools and stuff like that. And I will say, definitely with the occult, we're all witches. I think there's like an infinite, I guess, number of realities for magical practices. Like I have a history in Wicca also. Like I love Scott Cunningham, Starhawk, they're my people. But that's a different energy. If you're tuning into the energy of the Earth Goddess, an egregor that has a specific kind of energy that has been attuned through different people doing different types of rituals. So that's the same with Ifa. I mean, definitely, some energies can come through as, in different readings and stuff like that. But the only way to really verify it is through using the specific divination system of Ifa, because Ifa, the divination system, there's like a lot of different parts to it, and it's basically like tapping into a computer code and like
Mhm.
tapping into like a matrix. And
Mhm.
so in order to like decipher that kind of energy, and to really, I guess, like to get a really thorough reading, you kind of have to use the instruments. And then also, there's just different Orisha energies. Like like this, for instance, Oshun, like people see her as being like really sweet and stuff like that, but then there's all other pathways where she has a machete and cuts heads off. You know what I mean? She's
Mm-hmm.
like very, you know, fickle.
Right.
So I always, you know, I would not really, if you get a card reading or something like that, if someone says like you have like Shango energy, da 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 da, you know, take it, you know, how you will. But for instance, with me, whenever I got initiated, I was literally not expecting for Shango to show up for me and like, oh
Mm-hmm.
shoot, like, yeah, we were thinking like, oh Lokun, you know, da 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 da, but then it showed up like Shango was like, we did divination and stuff like that. So
Right.
there's different ways to check, and then also our house is connected, or our Ile is connected to Ile Ife in Nigeria, which is like Obatala state, and so we get the verifications from the divination from through our Oba, who's like Nigerian, and then through his dad, who's like the king in
Right.
So it's like a whole thing. Like,
Okay. It's like
yeah,
it to me it's almost like a language thing. It's like if you are trying to find out whether or not your spiritual path leads you into a particular tradition, you got to kind of talk the language of the
you gotta talk
tradition
language.
to
Exactly.
really, make sure that it's in alignment with you. And I think that makes sense. Like if you're traveling internationally and you don't know the language, you might be able to navigate and be okay, but you would probably have a much better experience and really understand what you're experiencing a lot better if you spoke the language. It'd be a lot
Exactly.
harder for misinformation or inaccurate stuff or lost in translation type of stuff. So, initiation step one seems like it's getting a reading from someone who is, qualified to do that type of a reading in the tradition that you're interested in initiating
Mhm.
into. And maybe the personal exploration that you do can be like your very, very, very first step. Do I even want to go looking for this? But then it's time to reach out to a diviner or an elder or someone who is themselves initiated or somehow very familiar with that process to kind of help you with that. And I think it's super important that we talk about the idea of being a devotee of an Orisha or any deity versus initiating into the practice
Yeah.
that energy comes from.
Good
Because
question.
yeah, well, because these are, listen, these questions come from my genuine interest in these things. So they're not like, just formulaic. I'm like, look, by the end of this episode, I want to know if I wanted to get initiated today, like I know where to start at the very least as a result of listening to this, and maybe some things to look out for so that I don't get into trouble, at least at the start. But I love that you mentioned that, and I've heard other folks mention that, and I don't think that this gets mentioned enough, and I really wish that it did get said more because I think it would prevent confusion for people who are new on their journeys, and that is the idea of the difference between being a dedicate to a deity or a spirit and being initiated into their tradition. And I don't think we talk enough about the opportunity that we all have to honor and praise the energies or the deities that we love, that call to us, that we feel like give us some type of, direction in life or are examples to us and things like that. And I think that's really beautiful and awesome. But we also have the danger, I think, of the cultural appropriation problem then, because when we do these things on our own and we aren't familiar with the broader tradition around the spirit that we're reaching out to or what have you, then there's some danger there of taking practices without fully understanding where they come from or where they're most appropriately used or by whom, etc. So I kind of want to talk about both aspects of that. Like kind of the pro side, like yes, you don't have to initiate. You could dedicate your whole life to Oya, and that is fine. But also, if you are going to do that, there may be some things to take into consideration if you are not familiar with Oya's bigger story and her tradition and the people that she comes from and what is expected of those who maybe serve her or walk with her. So maybe let's start with the plus side, which is you don't have to initiate. You can just dedicate yourself to a deity. in Ifa, what might that look like? If I just love Oshun, I don't think initiation's for me right now, or I don't know where to go to get readings and get that whole process started. Can I just dedicate myself to Oshun, and how might I do that?
So, I would call that more of like a mystical path. So yeah, there are
Mm,
different. There's a devotee, and then there is people who are initiated. So as far as being like a devotee, um, that might just kind of look like you're there getting readings, and you might have like, so for instance, you can get like a hand of Ifa, which is
mm,
basically training wheels to initiation. Some
mm.
people never get initiated after hand of Ifa. Um, but that's I would classify that as like a devotee kind of thing. Um, so being a devotee, one of the plus sides is definitely you don't really have like life taboos. Whenever you get initiated, you have like taboos that it's kind of like you're making a pact with the spiritual tradition.
Right.
I didn't get initiated to an Orisha, which is like called crowning an Orisha. I
Mm-hmm.
got initiated in the Ifa, which is basically what gives you your blueprint. And I'm going to do other initiations too, but you don't get the taboos or anything like that. But one of the things about being a devotee, like in Ifa, one of the most important things to do is uplift your ancestors and elevate your ancestors. So it doesn't matter if you're like black, white, Mexican, Venezuelan, whatever. If you come to Ifa, they're gonna always tell you to do rituals to uplift your egun, who are
Right.
your ancestors. Because we always say that at least 7 generations back, there's someone who's an elevated ancestor who passed like the Iwapele test and became like, an ancestor that is
Right. That you can call on, that's actually got their spiritual ish together.
exactly.
Right.
So sometimes people just choose to be in a temple, like get a hand of Ifa or something, or they choose to be dedicated to their ancestors, and they might work with Oshun in the way of giving different offerings on her days. So there's different kinds of like calendars. In Lukumi, they say that Oshun's day is on Fridays, but in Nigerian tradition, in Nigeria, it's based on like a 4-day calendar. So it's like every 4 days is like an Oshun's day, but it's also different Orisha's days and stuff. So you can start with doing that. Also, learning about the Orishas is very important. Reading stories about their lives because they can
Hmm.
speak to anybody. Like Imaya was speaking to me before I got initiated. Um,
Right.
but also, listening to the songs because one of the best ways to praise or venerate Orishas and call on their energy is through songs. Through their songs. So, pulling up YouTube, maybe light some candles. We don't really use
YouTube is
candles
such a
anymore.
useful tool for these things.
Yeah,
Like I have playlists of everything. I've got all my saints got their playlists. I got all my Palo Mayombe music when I'm in the mood to really like get
yeah.
barefoot in the dirt. I've got my hoodoo blues tunes for those moments. So definitely,
So
guys,
is the portal.
YouTube. Yeah, just make yourself like a playlist or look up music of the spirit that you're trying to work with. So there's different levels, is what I'm hearing, to how dedicated to the Orisha you could be before you get to the level of deciding to initiate.
Yeah, and then I will say also, I'm an initiate, but I'm not gonna be a Babalawo. So I'm not.
Mm.
I'm not. I'll probably get
How do
initiated.
you know that? Do you know that because you've decided, or like do they tell you that in your initiation, like this is not your path?
It was in my reading, so
Mm.
I'll get initiated to Shango, and that involves like doing divination and stuff like that, and learning about him. But I'm not training to become like a Babalawo to have my own house and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. I would
Mm-hmm.
have more like a coven. So
Yeah.
that is kind of like a separation. So I have like a duty in a temple as a mentor, and I mentor people a lot on just like hoodoo, and then also different Ifa rituals and conduct and stuff like that. But I'm not necessarily training to become like a Babalawo or anything like that.
Gotcha,
Yeah,
gotcha. And so that's like the highest level in Ifa of like
there's many
initiation,
levels.
is that? There's
Well,
more than that.
there's a lot because there's Awo, Babalawo. There's people in Nigeria that are kings. There's different levels between that. There's different board. There's a lot of different. It's like a bureaucracy almost. So I
Okay,
mean,
yeah.
but I would say yeah. Generally, what people think of is training for like 10, 15 years to become a Babalawo, to have your own house, on Ile, and initiate other people and stuff like that. But if I got initiated to Shango, I would be able to initiate people into his like mystery school, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that connects, what you're able to pass on to the next person, and stuff like that.
I think it's a good time for a break.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
yeah, and that actually leads me into the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is when we talk about initiatory practices, we usually refer to them as like closed traditions because the practices and the rituals are not supposed to necessarily be done by those who are not initiated. So, would you say Ifa is a closed practice? And if so, what opens it to me? Is it a cultural thing? Is it a biology thing? Am I needing to be descendant of Africans for it to be open to me, or do I have a possibility if I'm from somewhere else or not maybe never been to Africa?
Yes, so definitely, I will say, Ifa is very open. Like, even with the initiations, like if like I had a friend who came for like a lot of it, except for like two parts, and that's the context that it was created in. So if you think about it, like Lukumi, Hoodoo, Santeria, these are traditions that were created in the context of enslavement, of war. I call them guerrilla warfare. It's just spiritual traditions. Not to be funny,
Yeah.
but it's true. So
Yeah.
there's a lot more. There's a lot more kind of like doorways to go through because they needed those doorways so that the traditions and customs wouldn't be corrupted. Whereas
Oh,
with
I love.
Ifa,
Wait, I'm sorry. Can we just
yes,
dwell on that for a moment? Because
yes,
that
mm,
that
well,
that right there is a gem that I'm definitely going to carry with me because, I find myself often in circles where these conversations come up. My followers or people online, it is a very diverse group, and my book club's diverse, and so we do talk about these things, and that is something that I think I will carry with me because to me it seems logical, like just speaking about hoodoo for example, because I have more familiarity with that. When it comes to hoodoo, I am a descendant of Charlestonian African Americans who still live on the land that we worked as slaves. Um, it is hard for me as a descendant of those people to believe that my enslaved ancestors would have been like, sure, Caucasian lady, come on over and dance in the circle with that. You know what I mean? Because the practices were specifically created, it may have been a different story when we talk about practices that are from Africa and are still African and still in Africa. But when we talk about the diasporic practices, we are really talking about practices that developed in the context of enslavement, horrible conditions, incredible violence, and a stark difference between, if no one else, at least Africans and Europeans.
exactly.
And so it is a little bit hard for me to imagine that my ancestors would have been open to the more like flexible definition of hoodoo that we see now, that's sort of like a mix of European occultism and Native American shamanism and all of that. And I understand that it's developed and it's grown and it's changed as people have associated with each other. But the very first practices, I cannot imagine would have been made available to people that were not also enslaved Africans for the protection of the people and the practice, not to be exclusive and like, oh, we want to keep this to ourselves, but we may die if we do not keep this super, super secret. And so from there is where we get this incredible emphasis, I think, on who can practice the practice. And much can be said about whether or not that's still a relevant consideration today. But I do like pointing out that that was at least a consideration at the inception of these practices. And because I think people sometimes treat initiatory practices like they're closed just because people like woke up one day and decided we want to be exclusive to others, or that it comes from a place of like anger and hatred, like you did this to me back then, so now I'm mad at you and you can't be in our club. But it comes from a much more innocent and protective place. These practices are based on initiation and are set up in a way to make it difficult to get to the core of these practices, because when they were encountered by others before, they were taken, changed, altered, modified, or forbidden. So yeah, I just wanted to, sorry, I just had to stop because I was like, that's a gem that I want to take with me when I have these conversations. Is that something that I know in my soul but never formulated into words? So I thank you for putting that into words like that. And I guess Ifa, you're saying, is a little bit more, maybe a little bit more flexible because it did not originate in this place of enslavement and war, and it was already existent, and it was used as the backdrop of what we created to get ourselves through the hard times. So there maybe isn't as much of a emphasis on we need to protect this because it wasn't created at a time when it was in danger. It was the way of the land, for.
Yeah, so I think, and this is based on what my like Nigerian Oba like has told me before. So he's like literally has said like, Ifa is more open than like, like voodoo, leukemia, all that kind of stuff. But it is the context that it was born in. Also, I mean, with Ifa, there was colonization, like Christian colonization, Islamic colonization. So that, I think that is kind of a reason that it was, it's still initiatory, but definitely as a whole, like Nigerian Ifa Sheshe is, as long as you respect the tradition and the protocols, it doesn't really matter like what race you are and stuff like that. And I think it took me actually getting initiated to understand that more, because I never would have thought I would be in a house like that, has white people in it and stuff like that. But after getting initiated, I understand more. It's kind of like more about like who respects the Orishas. It's like if you respect and you have the Iwape Pele, then you're not necessarily corrupting the tradition, and stuff like that. Whereas I know that there's different white people who are witches around here in New Orleans who work with black spirits and stuff like that. But I do feel a little bit more hesitant about that, because I don't know how they're working with these spirits. I don't know if they're respecting them, you know what I mean, and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of where the difference is. So with voodoo, I'm a little bit more like protective, I guess you could say. Because I mean, I think basically what I feel is the difference between voodoo and like Catholic candle magic is the spirits. You know what I mean? When I'm doing voodoo, I'm working with my like Louisiana and Mississippi ancestors from here because we have a special relationship. It doesn't matter for me. I don't really care if like a white person burns like a bay leaf and they're like, because it's a bay leaf. You know what I mean? As long as you're not calling on my grandma, like, right. You know what I mean? And then also being down here too. It's like there are different white people who will give offerings to spirits because no one else is paying attention. So that it is complicated, So,
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you'd rather the spirit be venerated by someone than be picky about who. You're
exactly.
absolutely, yeah, that's definitely a really good point. Especially like I think about people, I know white practitioners who do work for lost souls and go to
And
graveyards and pray
tranquils.
for babies' graves and blank graves and all of that stuff. And that's a part of their service. And they
It's so
do
funny.
that.
That's actually like in people's odus and Ifa that they're supposed to do that kind of stuff. I have
Wow.
a friend actually who that's his thing because it's this really intense energy to work with in tranquil spirit, and
Mm-hmm.
like Marilyn Monroe was in tranquil spirit, and watch Kim Kardashian's life because they you do not do I don't work within tranquil. You know what I mean? I
Yeah,
don't.
that's heavy work, like unclaimed kind of lost soul work. You know what I mean? And but you'd rather it be done, than be like, you can't do this because you're from Scotland. So
Exactly.
that's a
Yeah.
really a wise, and it doesn't surprise me when you say that it was initiation that taught you that, because I do think that I hear much more inclusivity and a much just like what I would consider a wiser approach to spirituality from elders and initiates. Because I think once you get to that level, you start to really see the practice at its core and you understand like what it's for and how it really works with the rest of the universe and how it is that a person comes to it. And
Yes, the
it's
technology.
typically, yeah, it's a technology for understanding like how we live our lives better and how what we came here to do. And when you understand that, then I think you don't really get too caught up in the little things like where someone was born or what tone of skin they have or what have you. So I think that will be very refreshing to some people to hear about Ifa because they may have been interested in it, but may have felt that it was just automatically closed off to them because perhaps they're not African or they don't have a lot of African ancestry. So thank you for clarifying that. I want to ask you, one of the last things I want to ask you is about resources for folks who are interested in Ifa in general, but also in the initiation process. Um, I've had a lot of babalawos in my DMs, but never in real life. So where do I go to find these experienced, properly initiated babalawos who can let me know if this is even something for me? I mean, do I have to
Well,
go to
that's the big.
Nigeria?
I don't know.
Do I have to go
Well,
to Nigeria? I mean, if
actually,
you real about it, if you real about it, then
I mean, you can't. You don't have to go to Nigeria, but there are a lot of people who do it. I follow someone. He just got back from Nigeria. Okay, so I would say, I can give some book recommendations real quick. So,
yeah.
Finding Soul on the Path of the Orishas is a really great one. That one is actually that's more about like the personal development things you want to go through before you even try to start working with um, Orishas and a
Okay.
godparent and stuff like that. And this person is um, she's like LGBTQ identified, so I really like her approach a whole lot. The Way of the Orishas is a great one. Um, yeah, I would start with those. Those are really good. And then as far as finding like godparents, that's kind of like a very individual process.
Mm.
But I always recommend that people try to find godparents in their local area
Mm-hmm.
if there are any. And shop around, get like a couple of readings or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And don't reach out to me asking well, I mean, I can help you out if there's some in like Los Angeles or
You're
something
like,
like
don't
that, or
call
New
me.
York, New York
Yeah.
or Miami. Yeah, LA, New York or Miami, I might be able to help you out. But there's people all over, and yeah, I would just say because these are all witches listening,
Mm-hmm.
get in connection with spirit, and just don't rush it too much. Whenever it happens, it's gonna happen. Like I said, I was like a bona fide like hoodoo, you know, study Hermetic Kabbalah, stuff like that, history of Wiccan, Buddhism, and then it just kind of sprang up on me, and I was like, oh, whoa. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I guess this is what's happening.
Yeah.
So it's a very just let it happen and don't rush the godparent thing, and make sure that you have also done your own shadow work as far as authority figures and your projections onto like authority figures and your expectations of them. So, don't go looking
Mm,
for a godparent for them to solve all your issues, because they are
right.
people too. I
Right.
love my godparents are absolutely amazing, but we respect each other as
Yeah.
people, and it's like, I realize they're humans, so I'm not really coming to them. And I have also noticed within myself, I'm really glad I've done shadow work, because there's instances where I wanted to project, and but
Mm-hmm.
you have to really, that's really important to ground yourself in your relationship with yourself and your ancestors, and do your reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it doesn't matter if you're white, black, Venezuelan. Everybody has ancestors that they need to get in contact with and kind of venerate. So I would say start with that. Yeah, but finding soul in the path of the Orishas is really great, and then the way of the Orishas is good too. Um,
Okay, I'll definitely try to remember to like put that in the description, at least on the YouTube version of this, so people know those titles. So starting out with some research, some information and understanding the systems, some inner work, shadow work, and a personal connection with your own ancestors,
yeah,
and then finding elders, in your community or nearby that you could speak with. And,
yeah,
I'll just say, curb your expectations of who your next teacher may be, because it
yes,
surprised me so much when I first learned about these systems that involve having godparents, because that was actually growing up, like going through my teenage and my early 20s as a Wiccan. The idea of a godparent is not necessarily something that you hear about. So I didn't even know what a godparent was. And when I remember the first time I met someone's godparent, and I don't know what I was expecting. I think I was expecting like 10-inch, some Erica Badu rap and like giant ankh earrings or whatever. And it was like some 60-year-old Puerto Rican dude in like a fitted cap and a t-shirt, because this is New
very
York City and
normal,
he's just
and
like
they
from the
be
Bronx.
powerful too. They no,
Yes,
they
he has like hundreds of godchildren.
yeah, they look so normal. A lot of them.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. And I was like, wait, what? I'm sorry. Like, are you wearing a fitted cap, sir?
yeah,
So yeah, lower your expectations. Maybe don't fall for the fashion of
because the
being a
Ashe, yeah, the
leader.
Ashe
And
that matter.
yeah, and let the ashe draw you to the right person as you research and work on yourself. So this has been incredibly enlightening. I
I
definitely
love
know.
it.
Yes, thank you for being here. I definitely know that the audience is going to feel a lot more confident in terms of asking the personal question of, is initiation for me and how do I get started? And the whole idea of this podcast is that by the end of each episode, you feel like you can do something in the witchy world a little bit better. And I definitely think I would pursue initiation much better after hearing all the things that you had to say. So I want to thank you so much for
Thank
your thoughts. Yes, can you please tell us a little bit about what you've got coming up and where people can find you?
Yeah, so find me at millennialsoulfood.biz. And then I'm on Instagram at millennialsoulfood. I do offer one-on-one private consultations, like as far as teaching. So I offer that in Hoodoo for Black people only. And then I offer another like course. They're like 4-week intensives in occult slash metaphysical studies. So that's like more like candle magic, some with the variety of occult traditions, and then I do tarot lessons. So yeah, and then I have a Patreon, patreon.com/millennial soul food.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you're into free content, go listen to my podcasts. I've really been diving down the rabbit hole lately.
Yeah.
So Age of Aquarius. Yeah, so that's basically what's going on with me. Um, Working on a book right now too. So I have to start up a
Ooh.
manuscript. It's actually a pagan book. It's on the Wheel of the Year. It's a 50-week self-care guide. So it's like, yeah. So I've been learning about well, I mean, I already knew about it, but really diving deep into like fuel and bulk, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so watch out for that.
I love that. Someone in the coven just recently was asking for like my book recommendations on Wheel of the Year type of stuff. And yes, that's going to be really awesome to be able to recommend your book, because I think that the Wheel of the Year conversation has definitely been very dominated by Wiccan writers and stuff like that. And it's always good to have more information out there about how you can honor the seasons, no matter what background you're from, or from some non-Wiccan traditions. So I'm excited for all the things that you've got going on. I definitely want the audience to make sure to check out Keon. The information for where you can find all of his stuff will be, their stuff will be all the way down in the description box if you are on YouTube. And yeah, I just want to thank you so much for your time and for being a part of this episode. And I hope you'll come back in the future.
Yes, please have me back. Thank you so much.
Yes, we will. Thank you so much. Thank you, witches, for tuning in to another episode of the BetterWitch podcast, presented by the Modern Witch Network. New episodes air every week. Watch the video broadcast on YouTube every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, or listen to the audio version on your favorite podcast platform every Thursday. And if you're a BronxWitch Coven member, join us right after each YouTube broadcast for a live Q&A about the episode. So whether you're watching on YouTube or tuning in on your favorite podcast platform, we want to know your thoughts on today's episode. So please make sure to leave reviews and comments wherever you are. You can show support for this podcast by grabbing some sweet merch over on my YouTube channel, and join the BronxWitch Coven on YouTube for behind-the-scenes footage from today's episode, as well as the details on how to join in on those live Q&As. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode. Blessed be.